Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Ever since the pandemic began and the government started spending billions of dollars supporting businesses, there's been an expectation of an impending wave of insolvencies. It was predicted to hit when the government support was withdrawn more than a year ago and companies that have been artificially propped up began to collapse. But it didn't really happen. In fact, the restructuring sector has been quieter than normal. But in the last few months, there are signs that things are changing. Already this year, two large construction companies, ProBuild and Condev, have appointed administrators with a huge impact on the many subcontractors and other businesses linked to them. So with global supply chains choked up, businesses unable to function with staff in isolation and rising costs, could we be seeing the beginning of a wave of companies going under? I'm joined today by McGrathNicol Chairman Jason Preston and McGrathNicol partner Kathy Sozou. McGrathNicol, of course, is a great supporter of this podcast, Fear and Greed. Jason, Kathy, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, Sean.
Jason, I might kick off with you. We have expected lots of insolvencies and administrations and that over the last couple of years, but we haven't seen it. Is it coming? I mean, where are we in that cycle?
Sean, I think it is, and we are starting to see the beginning of that. As you mentioned, if we sort of look back on the last 2 years of the pandemic, we saw a significant drop in insolvencies, and with the benefit of hindsight, that's probably unsurprising. I mean, we saw very low interest rates, significant government handouts, landlords, banks, financiers, the ATO, all supporting companies and an extended moratorium on enforcing debts, and we saw this huge drop in insolvency. Many of those factors, but not all of them, have now unwound. And of course, we're all expecting to see an increase in interest rates in the short term. We're seeing real cost pressures in the economy. Government has wound back its stimulus. Just in the last few days, the ATO has talked about being more front foot in terms of following up and pursuing some of the significant arrears that have accrued over the last 2 years. So, we do expect to see an increase in insolvency activity, and we're just starting to see that come through now.
Okay, so we've already seen some moves in the construction sector, Jason. It's been really high profile. Is the sector in trouble, or is it just those that at the edges are in trouble?
There are certainly some challenges in that sector right now. Why this sector? Why are we seeing it perhaps first with some challenges? I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, there's an inherent misalignment often in construction where construction companies are handing out fixed price contracts to their customers, but then fulfilling those with variable price subcontracts. And because of the cost pressures in the economy, because of delays that are coming from the lack of availability of labour and materials, the timing difference, if you like, between contracting on the customer side versus the supply side with subcontractors is extending. And a lot of them are getting caught out where they don't have significant balance sheets, but they've got a misalignment where they're actually in unprofitable contracts. And so it's often a sector that's susceptible early in an environment where we see costs increasing, and that's what's starting to play out a little at the moment.
Kathy, what's your take on the property sector?
Yeah, I think, much like Jason was just saying, where you have these industries where there's a mismatch between the way in which they sell to their customers and their cost base, we see this pressure playing out. And, we've seen on a large construction matter that we've been working on for a number of years now, where we've actually had to step in and take on the role effectively as builder and complete large multi-storey residential developments. And, in our capacity, we've seen firsthand how difficult it is post-pandemic or through the pandemic to actually get trades. There was a short shutdown period because of COVID on our projects, and we're only just coming through that. We've seen a particular uptick in regulatory focus with the building commissioner off the back of well-publicised, whether it be Mascot Towers or Opal pre-pandemic, but the impact of that really flowing through. And with the uptick in the regulatory focus and really the building commissioner being on the front foot, that added pressure where there's already cost pressures, there's already delays. It really is a sector under pressure. And most recently in New South Wales in particular, you see the weather event, and that has a real practical impact on construction where it adds to additional delays. So I certainly, we have seen firsthand the pressures in that industry, and I think they will continue to play out. Even just speaking to a CEO in the industry quite recently on a sort of in that new home development space where we've seen government support to new homeowners, and we've seen sort of demand uptick in circumstances where builders may not have anticipated that, and so signing up all this new work. But there's a mismatch in pricing. And so, again, I'm not sure that those developers are making money. I think it's cost recovery, and I think it's working through a period where working capital is actually quite tight to see if they can make it through this kind of disconnect over the last couple of years.
And of course, Kathy, it's an industry built on a network of subcontractors and other SMEs. So whilst there's high demand for them, if a large company goes into administration, or certainly if it becomes insolvent, that has big flow-on effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we've seen, I think you mentioned ProBuild, is in some respects, no doubt there's a structural impact in the industry from a collapse of that size. But, there's been some good outcomes there. Within particular, I think in Victoria, a lot of the developments have now found a new home with Roberts & Co. So, to the extent there's a large collapse, it doesn't necessarily have to mean a terminal flow-on effect to all the subcontractors if there's a good outcome. But certainly it is an industry, I think, where we will see more pressure, and it may not always lead to an outcome that supports the subbies in the extended network.
Stay with me, Jason and Kathy. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is McGrathNicol Chairman Jason Preston and McGrathNicol partner Kathy Sozou. So what other sectors are facing difficulties in coming months? Construction, obviously, but outside that, what other areas do you expect to see more work in, really?
I might jump in with one. I think retail's an interesting one. No doubt throughout the pandemic, retail was certainly an industry where we saw some extreme winners and some losers. So, people that could quickly switch to online, all of us working from home, it's no surprise, all those home services, desk supplies, chairs, there was a real uptick for some retailers. But then all the bricks and mortar retailers really struggled. So I think that's yet to play out fully, and I think we will start to see the pressure. We've seen the winners, but I think the losers will start to flush through. It's an industry that's impacted, I think you touched on supply chain in your intro, Sean, and I think that can be significant on the retail sector, and labour pressure, just that ongoing cost pressure when margins are already tight. So I think we'll see some more activity on the retail front.
Jason?
Yeah, sure. I think what we often see is, regardless of where the economy's at in its cycle, there's often just areas of structural change happening in the economy. And one, of course, that we've seen over the last few years and that's accelerating is the whole decarbonisation thing. So we saw 12 months or so ago some significant fallout in the coal sector and the mining services sector. Now that's paused at the moment because commodity prices are strong, but the reality is in the medium term, I think we'll see that come back and continue as part of the structural change. We saw a number of renewable projects that had difficulties again just because so much capital has flown in and there's been regulatory issues and supply chain issues. So I think we'll still see some structural fallout in the broader energy sector. Tourism is an interesting one, obviously significantly impacted during lockdown, but also one of the beneficiaries of a lot of the government support. We then had this period of time where we're all kind of locked into Australia, and so we've seen a growth in domestic tourism, but we're not really seeing international tourism, and particularly that China market, come back anywhere near to where it was. So I think tourism's definitely one to watch, particularly those that were particularly geared to that inbound China market. Education's another one where we already have seen some fallout, again, that part of the market that's orientated towards inbound students that have been significantly impacted in the short term.
I was just going to add one more, which is, I think, residential aged care. So that was a sector that we saw under pressure even pre-pandemic. We obviously had a Royal Commission into aged care. There are some structural changes in that sector around pricing and the way the homes operate. And it was a sector that was under pressure pre-pandemic with a lot of small operators, just the cost base not really supporting standalone homes and aged care facilities, and there's sort of a government push towards in-home care. So it was a sector under pressure pre-pandemic, and I think obviously you then overlay 2 years of the pandemic in residential aged care facilities where there's incredible cost pressures, there's incredible regulatory quality issues, you've got staff shortages, and I think really we've not seen any of that really go to its natural end in that sector. And I just wonder whether that will start to unlock in the coming year or so as we get back to whatever this new normal is and some of those pressures come to play.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm wondering, Jason, are there any areas which I'm not sure they benefit, but certainly are a bit safer than some of these things like tourism, education, aged care, construction? Are there other sectors that you may have a slowdown in work because of the cycle itself?
Yeah, look, I mean, sectors that are able to pass on cost increases, so sectors that have some level of monopoly pricing or unique product or service, should do well because they'll be able to effectively maintain growth despite costs going up. But I think if we look back on the last 2 years, that a lot of the things that have supported the economy more broadly, those low interest rates, government support, as they wheel back, I think it's going to be challenging for most sectors. It's unlikely that the underlying conditions will improve for them. And add to that, the supply. A lot of sectors at the moment really are feeling the pinch from the supply chain issues that are out there and just struggling to get product to market. So I think those that will go well are those that really have a unique position in the market and can pass on some of these issues that are coming through with cost pressure.
Jason, how long does this take? I mean, right at the front, you sort of said that things are getting back to normal in a sense, so we don't have all the government support packages. Is this something that plays out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years until we get back to a normal pre-COVID position?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, if I reflect back on sort of 2007 and 8 in the GFC, there were lots of indicators around pressure building. And then it wasn't really until it all happened and the credit squeeze occurred that we sort of saw really a very significant and quick fallout. I think as we sit here today, there are certainly indicators that the pressure is building in the economy, but it's very hard to see at this point any particular event that's going to make all that happen quite quickly and for there to be fallout as a result. So I think we'll continue to see a steady increase in the level of stress and following on from that insolvency. I don't think it's very hard to sit here at the moment and say here's one particular event that's going to occur that's going to bring all that forward and make it occur quickly.
Kath, just to finish off, if companies think they might be in trouble, what should they be doing?
I mean, what we would always say is, just get some help, speak to advisors. I think the worst thing that companies can do is not have a plan or hope for the best. But I think, there's someone in our organisation always says hope is not a strategy.
Oh, I don't know.
Can make you feel better. But I think this sort of acknowledgement, and I think you have to have a plan and engage stakeholders early. I think, in some respects over the last 2 years, what we have seen is a willingness of all stakeholders across the board to be more supportive than I would say is in the ordinary course or business as usual. We've seen financiers being supportive, we've seen the government, we've seen the ATO. And I think to the extent that you engage early in a structured conversation, if you see the headwinds coming and talk through those and get some advice, then you actually are well placed to trade through a difficult period, because I think there is a willingness to support through. I think if it's head in the sand and it'll come good and we just hope it all plays out, that's where it becomes a more difficult proposition.
Jason, Kathy, thank you both for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That was McGrathNicol Chairman Jason Preston and McGrathNicol Partner Kathy Sozou. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.